Welcome to Her Voice. Today we examine the rise of women entrepreneurship in the Middle East. Where do opportunities abound, and is owning your own business the way ahead for career-minded women? My guests today include Marine Tadros, a former Egyptian real estate consultant, Rasha Gamloush, entrepreneurship manager at ArabNet, one of the largest online hubs for digital professionals in the Middle East North Africa region. My first guest is Sarah Abu Alia, the founder of Art Medium, an arts and entertainment management company. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on Her Voice. Now, tell me, what is Art Medium?
Art Medium is an entertainment production company. What we do is we produce events as one line of business, and we work on theater, fine arts, and music. So we have music festivals and art fairs and theater performances. And we've recently ventured into the digital music space, where we're going to be launching an online music video channel.
So can you tell me how, being a relatively young woman, what was the experience of setting up your business? Did people take you seriously at first?
I think people take you seriously if you take yourself seriously, and you expect that people wouldn't take you seriously, but you can easily change people's minds, and their kind of outlook towards you. It's a bit challenging to begin with, but it's pretty much just about confidence.
Okay, great. Tell me, what were the barriers that you faced as you tried to set this business up?
Um, I mean, there are several, and they come, I think, in phases of how the business is growing. So, generally, when you first start off, or when I first started off, which is not too long ago, I mean, it's almost 3 years now, it was more about understanding how to really do business well, because I had no business background, and I mean, I was an arts major and I worked in media for a while, but it was more about learning how to really create a business structure that can be sustainable here. And it was very much a trial and error process. And then after that, you move into management, and you have a lot of challenges when it comes to management and learning how to work with a team and to grow a team and to really turn it into something that is strong and has a lot of impact. And then you continue to, as you grow, your challenges, if you will, grow. And then there's, understanding different markets and how you're going to tap into them and how you're going to create something that would be successful. So as you can see, it develops as the business develops.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you are an educated woman. Do you think in any way having this education and kind of a worldly sense about you put you in an advantage in setting up this sort of a business?
And education is great. I think education is something that is needed for anyone who has the ability to get one, to get a good education. But I also believe that entrepreneurship is about hard work and vision and perseverance and kind of having a dream that you really believe can come true.
Okay, now can you tell me about maybe the cultural complexities you faced in setting up your business in terms of maybe family pressure or the community expectations of you as a woman? Did they
Yes,
play a role?
I think this is one of the main challenges for women here in this part of the world. It's not very common, if I can word that better. What I'm trying to say is that when I was younger, I didn't think that it would be an option for me to be an entrepreneur as an adult. I always thought, there was one certain way that Arab women would grow up and become adults, and it would, if I saw a professional career there, it would be as an employee. But this is something that came to me on my own through my own personal experiences, and I find that it's not the traditional path for a lot of women. Um, there are challenges because society expects you to be a little more traditional in this part of the world, and you end up getting a lot of pressure from family members and people around you. But I think at the end of the day, if you really have a strong vision of what it is that you're trying to achieve and you're willing to commit to that, then you'll see this just like any other challenge that's a regular entrepreneurial challenge.
Now, your business really kind of hits on a regional market. You've got people coming from across the Middle East to some of your events. Can you tell me how governments have or have not maybe played a role in allowing you to develop your business? I mean, in the Middle East, the first thing people think about maybe is political instability, but clearly that hasn't stopped you from moving ahead.
That's a good question. It really does affect what we do because we're in culture. And so this has to do with society and politics. And so it's about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And art is about expression. Any kind of art is about expression. So people expressing themselves is something that is usually controlled, or has been somewhat controlled in this part of the world to certain extents, throughout history. And so I feel like the developments that happen politically do really affect. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed how certain changes have happened throughout the region once the different governments have come into power. And for us specifically in Jordan, it hasn't been an extreme challenge. But when we bring in artists, for instance, from Palestine, we face different issues. Even when we have performances here in Amman, we notice that sometimes we aren't as free as we'd like to be with the artists to allow them to express themselves, and there's a lot of control. There's kind of a lot of people watching what we're doing. So I feel it's something that will change and develop over time as different governments come into power in this part of the world.
Okay, now you were talking so eloquently about the experience of dealing with some of these political barriers, but in a very practical way. Can you tell me how women, what they should expect if they want to set up a business, the startup costs? What are some of the other major issues they have to tackle?
So I think the regular textbook stuff, like the list of things that you have to do to start up a company, are easily accessible to everyone. And there are organizations all over the region who are supporting entrepreneurs and who are putting them in touch with investors and who are helping them create business plans and working with them on, understanding their markets. So I feel like if you seek this kind of support, you can find it anywhere, and it's readily available everywhere, all over the region, for incubators and different kind of startup organizations. The challenges I feel, honestly, and the ones that I personally, sort of suffer from, are more really just being tough and having to persevere through the challenging times. And then that's the test of really being an entrepreneur, because everything else can be told to you, but you can't really understand all of the difficulties that you're going to go through in terms of failing and picking up again and trying to succeed, and then failing and picking up again and trying to succeed. And each time you fail, you take a step towards more progress, and that takes a lot of perseverance. And I honestly feel like this is the main challenge for any entrepreneur.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Next, I'm joined by an Egyptian woman entrepreneur who tells us what it's like to fight to set up a business of your dreams in the midst of political turmoil. Welcome back to the show. I'm joined by Maureen Tadros. Maureen, you were first a lawyer in Egypt, and then you decided to switch into business. Can you tell me why?
Well, I know that people imagine that being an entrepreneur in the Middle East is difficult, but actually I found it much more difficult being a lawyer and an employee. In the Western world, lawyers are the higher band of education, whereas in the Middle East they're not. So working in that environment was quite difficult, and you just couldn't get anywhere. You couldn't get any work done, so it was quite pointless. So I decided to just start my own thing.
Okay, tell me a little bit about what you started.
Well, I actually originally started working for a company that built the world's largest ever open-air food court, and that took us about 3 years. And once we developed the whole food court, we were the first in the Middle East, and then everyone wanted to start the same thing. So I was the only person that wasn't still attached to the company that could do that. So I started my own consultancy. And so I helped people, I consulted on them developing these open-air food courts.
So you had this consultancy business, you clearly had carved out a niche for yourself. Was being a woman, was being a woman in any way helping or hindering your ability to work?
Well, I think that industry in particular is very male-dominated. There were only two ladies, me being one of them, actually in the industry that were known at all. So I think for me what helped a little bit was being an expat. Even though I'm Egyptian originally, they think of me as a Brit. So that definitely helped. I think being a woman in the Middle East and working in anything is always a little bit of a challenge, especially when you're going out for meetings alone and just being in a male-dominated industry is quite difficult. But no, I didn't find it particularly hindering. We still managed to get what we needed to get done.
Okay, but again, this was Egypt. You were there for about 10 years. You were there during the revolution,
Yes.
and then afterwards.
Yes.
How did that impact your ability to run your business?
Well, the revolution pretty much destroyed our business. The food and beverage industry, no matter what's going on in the Middle East, will always be fantastic. People eat, and the actual food court that we built made it the most money that we had ever made during the revolution, because we kept it open and people came and ate. But then trying to develop new food courts was almost impossible. It required foreign investment, it required franchises being allowed to open in the Middle East or in Cairo, and it required national investment, and none of that was happening at all. So we had some constructions that had stayed still for over 13 months there. Nothing had happened.
Now, you chose to leave, of course, but there were people who stayed. You said your industry was male-dominated. There must still be men there working. Do you think that it's easier for them to kind of continue on despite these political issues?
I don't think it's particularly easier for them. Well, it wasn't before the Muslim Brotherhood took over. I'm not quite sure what happened after that. I imagine that it was probably easier for them. I had never lived through that period. I left before the elections, so I can only imagine that being a woman and working in that kind of industry was quite difficult once that period had come along. And hopefully now it'll be a little bit better.
Now, you've been in touch a little bit with some of your other female friends back home. Some of them own their own businesses. What are their experiences as they kind of continue to build?
Well, I think their experiences during the reign of President Morsi was very much that they were non-existent. They really weren't working that much. Again, the whole country was in turmoil. There wasn't any investment going into anything. People weren't spending the money that they have. And being a woman at that time was particularly worrying, because we didn't know how oppressed it was going to become. So people weren't starting their own projects around that time.
Now, living in the UK, I'm sure the experience is very different. You went from a business in Egypt, and now you have a women's concierge business called First Ladies London Concierge. Can you tell me, what is it and what has the experience been like in setting that up versus what you did back home?
So I set up First Ladies mainly to help ladies coming over from the Middle East and from Russia to set up their own businesses in London. So we actually aid them. So we have a corporate concierge that helps them to take care of everything at home and take care of their businesses as they're growing. And we actually grow their businesses with them. And it's been a different experience. Of course, the day-to-day moving around and running of a business is so much easier here. You don't have to think about moving around on your own and safety and meeting people and what's going to come after the meeting if you have a meeting with a man, or all those things aren't there. So the day-to-day running of the business is much easier. You're taken much more seriously. There's just a whole huge issue that isn't there that you don't think about at all. Having said that, I think the Middle Eastern market's completely different to here, and sometimes it's easier to sell there than it is here.
Can you tell me a little bit what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a harder sell here because the Middle East is quite small, so people tend to know each other. If you're an expat, you have that extra credibility of coming from London and being brought up there, and people tend to trust you a bit more, whereas here you're just like everybody else. And I think that there people tend to know each other. There's a certain smaller A class, if you want to call them that, and people know you or have heard of you, and your reputation follows you everywhere. So if you have a good reputation, then people have no problem handing over their business to you. Whereas here, you're just one in a million. So it's a bit of a harder sell. You're not offering anything particularly unique. There's nothing particularly unique about you. So I think people take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times before they trust you enough to give you their business here.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Next, we hear about one of the newest frontiers in women's entrepreneurship, and that's the digital market. What type of businesses are females creating, and does working online make it easier to have a business and a great family life? Stay tuned. Welcome back to the show. Now, we heard from two different entrepreneurs, but there is another field that you may not necessarily associate with female entrepreneurs, and that is digital and technology. Now, I'm joined by Rasha Gamlush, who is the entrepreneurship manager at ArabNet, one of the largest online hubs for digital professionals. Rasha, thank you so much for joining us today on Her Voice.
Thank you, Kumusa. Sorry.
That's okay. So, we were talking a little earlier about the experience of setting up a business in this field, digital technology. Can you tell me, is there a demand for women entrepreneurs?
There is a demand generally for more entrepreneurs, and as women make up a growing percentage of the population of the Middle East, women entrepreneurs have been becoming more and more of a growing a thing we're seeing more often in the region. We see a lot of women entrepreneurs in Jordan, in Egypt, and in Saudi Arabia. So they're taking up fields not necessarily just in technology, but also in social, humanities, and food and beverage industries.
Now, ArabNet is such a unique site in that it really offers a chance for women to talk about their experiences in setting up their businesses. Can you tell me what they're saying in terms of their motivations for getting into this industry?
What I've realized, seen a lot of a trend is that the motivations are not very different from those of men that want to start their own businesses. Women also feel like they're equally as educated, as enthusiastic, and as achieving, and they also want to prove that they can do it, and they're doing quite well. I mean, the women entrepreneurs in the region are doing at some level better than men, and they're holding great positions and hiring people and engaging in so many different parts of the community. They tend to be more social in nature. A lot of the social scene is filled with entrepreneurs. There's a lot of women in social digital, not necessarily activism, but social business and awareness and raising and taking on initiatives, especially in the digital scene. So it's basically trying to take, I mean, if you women are 50% of the population, you hopefully hope that they're 50% of the entrepreneurs as well. So they're only stepping in to fill in their part.
Okay. Now, as you mentioned, the entrepreneurship digital field is so vast. Can you give me some examples of exactly what these women are investing and setting up their businesses for?
I've been looking at the scene between the Middle East and West, and it's interesting that there's a bit of overlap, but also we thought that it would take a lot more for women in the region to pick up on topics that are not so hot topics for women, like women content, mother and child education, or motherly related stuff. But also women in the Middle East are working in e-commerce, they're working in production, they're in gaming. I mean, one of the top gaming studios in the Middle East, the co-founder is a woman, and she's listed as the top five women in gaming in the world. So they're really thriving in different segments. I think they're doing quite well in e-commerce and in content. These are the two hottest topics at the moment, but they're also doing quite well in other domains as well.
Now, it's one thing for a woman to have a dream to start a business, but what sort of financial issues, for instance, would they be facing in trying to set up their business? Is it different from someone who would want a traditional business that's not in the digital field, for instance?
The thing with the Middle East is that regulations are not so friendly for mobile, except some countries which are catching up, like Jordan. But once you get to any financial transactions, especially that PayPal just recently launched in the region, it was really impossible to have any sort of other financial transactions happening overline, except through a setup portal through a bank. And so for you to have this, you actually have to have your company registered. So really the obstacles of setting up a company and everything still stand for online, except now with the introduction of PayPal and some alternative payment methods, it's becoming a bit more lenient. Funding methods are the traditional ones are available now. There's more of a look to crowdfunding websites, other sources of of money coming into the. I mean, there's a recent crowdfunding website that just got set up called Eureka, but regional entrepreneurs are very popular on Indiegogo and other crowdfunding platforms to find alternative methods of funding.
So at the ArabNet conferences that you have set up, can you tell me, is there any sort of profile for the woman entrepreneur interested in this field? For instance, are they young? Are they educated? What sort of backgrounds do they come from?
Well, one thing I want to point out on this topic is that we've done conferences across different parts in the region, and we've done conferences focused on Cairo and Riyadh. And in Cairo, we have a startup demo competition, and our top 3 winners for that competition in Cairo were women entrepreneurs. So this is something that's quite significant in the region. And when we went to Riyadh last year, in November 2012, we had a conference in Riyadh, and more than 40% of the attendees were women. Wow. So for a tech conference in anywhere really, to have more than 40% attendees that are women, that's not a women-specific conference. It's really quite outstanding, and we felt a bit overwhelmed. We were not expecting this amount of women turnout because in Saudi, the regulations are a bit different when it comes to mixing of men and women, so we actually had to keep an eye out. And it was quite outstanding to see all these women that are very connected. They're very plugged into the scene. They are mainly young, but also like the entire demographic of the region is quite younger. And right. they're very active. They're very educated. Yes, it's an interesting. There's a bit of distinction between different parts of the region. So in the Gulf regions, women are more educated than other regions because education is free. It's high level and very good quality education is free. And other regions are still struggling a bit with education for women. But in Saudi specifically, the amount women universities are big. They have entrepreneurship centers. They have big departments of technology and computer sciences, and women are doing quite well on these fronts. So they're pretty plugged in. It's not necessarily most of them have bachelor degrees, if not more, and they're very tech savvy. And penetration is pretty high of mobiles in the region. It's about 50 or more percent per country, 50% of smartphone penetration specifically. Wow. So it's quite, they're part of the dynamics of the country, and they're more interested to learn because in certain countries, their education is their ticket out of the house, basically, out of getting money out of the parents, being more financially independent, and being more interactive in the society.
Okay, all right. My last question for you. Tell me, who are the women that we really should be watching out for in terms of Arab tech entrepreneurs?
So I think I already mentioned Rana Abbas. Rana Abbas was listed as one of the top 5 women in gaming in the world. She's definitely someone to look out for. They launched their gaming studio a few years back, and they've been releasing quite a lot of interesting stuff right out of their roots. There's Yasmin Al-Maheri from Super Mama. Yasmin is Egyptian with her team. They've done quite a lot of, they have mentors from different continents, and they're gaining a lot of traction regionally, and they're building a very interesting company and a very interesting model for a business. Someone would be interesting is Rasha Khouri. She has Dia Boutique, which is an e-commerce fashion outlet. She's based out of the region and the UK, and she's been doing quite well, very plugged in, and very interesting person to look at.
Okay, great. Well, there's a handful right there. I think everyone at home will definitely want to reach out and figure out who they are. Thank you so much for joining us today on our show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all of my guests today. Are you a woman entrepreneur and want to share your story? Get in touch at levant.tv. Have a great day.